So welcome everyone to this webinar on Article 25 on the election and participation into the public affairs. This is Daisuke from Center for Civil and Political Rights. I'll be moderating this meeting today. And before further ado, I would first of all like to inform you that there is a French interpretation for this meeting. So press to choose the French interpretation, press the button on the bottom of your screen. There you can choose either French or English or off. And please mute yourself when you're not speaking so that we can avoid any background noise. And if you'd like to speak, you can use raise hand button on your screen or literally raise your hands in your video so that I notice. If you cannot reach me, you can also send a message in the chat, and then I or Lazari, my colleague from the center, will notice you and give you the floor. And if you have any unstable internet connection or prefer not to speak, you can also communicate through the chat. And you can also turn off your video if your internet connection is not so stable. And also this meeting is recorded. Please be informed of that. And since we have interpretation, those who want to speak in English can do so, and also for those in French, the same. All right, and then today, this meeting is joined by, first of all, Sarah Cleveland. Thank you for your time. She was the former member of the committee, Human Rights Committee, and now is the Louis Henkin Professor of Human and Constitutional Rights. Sarah, you are in Paris, right now? Okay, so good morning. And Sophia, she holds an LLM and MSc from King College London, and has also publication on the topic of this transformative impact of the 4 fair elections social movement in Russia. And she has been interning at the center since March 2020, and mainly involved in developing this publication we are presenting today. Thank you, Sophia, for also joining this meeting. Well, now I'd like to give the floor to Lazari, my colleague. She would explain the objective of this meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to make clear what the goal of this meeting is, there are basically 2 parts to it. In the first part, you will all get some background information. So first from Sarah Cleveland on the article itself, then from Sophia, who will go into this draft research, and then from me about a bit about the review cycle in the Human Rights Committee and advocacy with the Human Rights Committee. But in the second part of the meeting, the floor will really be yours. And we would like for us to have an interactive discussion with each other, and for you to give us feedback on how we could improve this draft. So Sophia will present to you what is already in there. But it can be that if you hear her presentation or you've read the document, that you see that there are some topics that are not really addressed, or if you see that there are some gaps in the way that the Human Rights Committee is approaching this topic from your experience on the ground, please let us know in the discussions. And what we also would like to do is to this draft add a chapter that is very practical, that helps you to know how to engage with the Human Rights Committee or the treaty bodies more in general. So what we would like to know from you is, what information do you need? So if you have already engaged with the Human Rights Committee and you have experienced some challenges, for example, let us know what the challenges were. Or let us know which information you missed when trying to engage with the Human Rights Committee, because this is the kind of information that we want to include in this additional chapter. And we really want this chapter to be as relevant as possible and as ready to use as possible. So anything that you can share with us on that, that would be great for the discussions. We had a similar meeting yesterday with experts from Latin America, and I just wanted to give you a few examples of the things they shared with us, just to give you some inspiration. So for example, something that came back was that one of the topics that is currently missing in this draft is, how is the internet influencing campaigning and elections, for example. And there's a few more topics that are not addressed in the draft, but that might have been addressed by regional mechanisms. And we could try to include these topics because there is some jurisprudence on that, but just not from the Human Rights Committee. So that would be informative to include it. Another suggestion was to include good practices. Another topic that was missing in the current draft is administrative restrictions. So these are just a few examples, some of the feedback that we got yesterday. So if you have things to add after hearing everything that you will hear today, we will be very happy to take note and to include it afterwards. Because this process will not end at this webinar. So we will try to include you in the rest of the process of this draft. So Sophia will rework the draft after getting all this feedback, add this additional chapter on how to use the Human Rights Committee on this topic. And we will include you when we have a new version. You can give your feedback to us. So after this webinar, you will still get some emails from me. And we really hope you can be involved until the end of the process. So this is just a bit to give you the context of this webinar. And I'll stop speaking now so Daisuke can continue.
Thank you, Rosary. So we have limited time till 12 Central European time, but we would also like to have enough time for discussion at the end. Let's also try everyone to be precise and brief if we make any comments and questions. Well, without further ado, I would like to invite Sarah for her introduction to Article 25 of the ICCPR. Sarah, please have your floor.
Great, thank you, and welcome everyone. And my thanks to the CCPR Center for organizing this effort and focusing on this issue, and for inviting me to give a presentation. I'm very, very happy the CCPR Center is doing this. Article 25, I think, has been somewhat of an orphan among the articles of the ICCPR. The Human Rights Committee did a general comment about the article back in 1996, which focuses mainly on elections. And the committee had discussed at various points the possibility of updating that general comment, but obviously it has not had the time or opportunity to do so yet. So I think that the CCPR Center's focus on this issue is very, very timely and essentially will fill the gap that has been left between the general comment from 1996 and the practice that has been or could be developed around Article 25. My comments today, I should say, are based, I'd say, entirely on my own experience on the Human Rights Committee from 2015 to 2018. I have not attempted to divine what the committee has done since I left. I'm sure that the CCPR Center is on top of that. But during the period that I was on the committee, I think there was a very interesting trajectory with respect to Article 25. When I came on the committee, it was very rarely addressed in concluding observations or in individual communications. It essentially only was raised by the committee if civil society had focused on the issue, which was very rare. And usually Article 25 came up in the context of flawed elections. So elections that had been held and had been subject to international monitoring that felt that there had been various problems with the elections. But this changed over time for a variety of reasons. One was that the Carter Center had a sustained effort over a period of years that included Sir Nigel Rodley and Victor Rodriguez Recia from the Human Rights Committee, focusing on developing a broad template of understanding of international rules regarding elections. Civil society in this period began bringing slightly more issues themselves to the committee for country examinations. I myself asked my research assistants to look at Article 25 issues for every country the committee was examining because I felt that it was an underutilized article. I and several other members of the committee also were of the view that structural obstacles to meaning participation in public life should be understood as falling within Article 25. So not just discrimination against individuals or groups in elections, but essentially autocratic and anti-democratic government design should also be addressed under Article 25. So rulers who extend powers and refuse to leave office, coups and coup attempts, grand corruption, that distorts the responsiveness of the state to the public and also to and its ability to effectively address human rights issues, and authoritarian regimes in general. And I will give a few examples of those issues later. I think this is a really important area for Article 25. I think it's also a very delicate area because, of course, the covenant did not purport to require every government in the world to be a democratic government at the time the ICCPR was adopted, but it's quite difficult to reconcile any other form of government with Article 25. And structural issues of this type go to the very core of the state and its power, and therefore, of course, involve a more fundamental confrontation between a treaty body and the state than tinkering with the format of election design. At the end of my time on the committee in October, November 2018, the committee adopted guidance for the development of lists of issues that identified Article 25 as an under-examined aspect of the covenant, and hopefully has helped the committee better integrate Article 25 issues into its own research and developing lists of issues and lists of issues prior to reporting rather than waiting for civil society to raise the issues. And toward the end of my time on the committee, we also got a series of individual cases raising Article 25 issues. This included Nasheed versus the Maldives, the deposed president of Maldives who had been politically prosecuted and prevented from standing for re-election. Lula versus Brazil, still pending before the committee. I think Lula had been subject to, had been prosecuted and was in jail, and that was preventing him from standing for re-election. He claimed it was politically motivated and improper. And then there were cases from Spain and Colombia regarding the propriety of impeachment as a form of removal of high-level government officials, because impeachment involves no appeal, which is ordinarily required under Articles 14 and 15. and some other cases involving the question of when an individual can be barred from standing for office as a result of a criminal prosecution and conviction. So I think those all have elevated the issue on the consciousness of the committee, but the committee is very much awaiting engagement by civil society to push it and to bring information to it, so it has that information at its fingertips when it engages in country examinations. And therefore, I think the report that you're preparing is extremely important. So briefly on Article 25, and I'm relying primarily for my launching point on the general comment of the committee for these remarks. Article 25, as you know, recognizes and protects essentially 3 different things. One is the right of every citizen to take part in the conduct of public affairs. Second is the right to vote and be elected. And the third is the right to have access to public service, to serve in government. The last 2, voting and be elected and serving in the government, were the most detailed issues addressed in the prior general comment. Whereas the right of every citizen to take part in the conduct of public affairs, I think, is a quite broad and potentially very powerful right. And I think it is the one that has been the least creatively developed and has the most potential. That said, obviously, given, among other things, the recent election in the United States, there are huge issues relating to elections and other aspects of the article. But I think between the guidance and the committee's general comment, your draft does a very good job of dealing with the election issues, and so I will focus a little bit more on aspects of the other issues. Article 1 of the covenant regarding self-determination deals with the core ability of people to choose their form of government. But Article 25 deals with the right of individuals to participate in those processes and most importantly, can give rise to individual communications. So with respect to the form of government as well as participation in government, it's Article 25 where the action would occur, at least under the optional protocol. The general comment says that where citizens participate in the conduct of public affairs through freely chosen representatives, it is implicit in Article 25 that those representatives do in fact exercise governmental power, that they are accountable through the electoral process for their exercise of that power, and they exercise only the powers allocated to them in accordance with constitutional provisions. So this is a quite broad and powerful framework for saying that government representatives, once they are elected, are not in a free-for-all to do whatever they want, but they actually have to behave in a manner that is responsive. They have to be accountable if they are not responsive, and they cannot exceed the scope of their powers, or they violate the Article 25 rights of the public. So it's sort of a group right in that sense. These issues have largely been unexplored by the committee. The general comment notes that citizens also take part in the conduct of public affairs by exerting influence through public debate and dialogue with their representatives, or through their capacity to organize themselves. The draft addresses the right of freedom of association and assembly, which is of course closely related to the ability to participate in public affairs in this way. But it does not address the issue of legislative process, I believe. And I think this is also a very important current issue with respect to Article 25, which is to say, in order for citizens to effectively participate in the conduct of public affairs by exerting influence through public debate and dialogue, draft legislation has to be transparent. It has to be made publicly available. It has to be made publicly available to the citizenry. There has to be access to the citizenry to parliamentary debates. And the citizens have to have a meaningful opportunity to comment on, participate in the debates regarding legislation. These are rights that we've seen routinely violated recently, for example, in Poland and Hungary, as they've rammed legislation through. And I think that is an Article 25 issue. Corruption is raised by the draft, and this is also a structural issue. And one comment I had on the draft was that perhaps structural issues like corruption should be separated out from specifics regarding election design specifically. But grand corruption, of course, in government officials prevents the government from being adequately responsive to the citizenry on human rights issues. The committee has addressed this both under Article 25 and also under Article 2 of the covenant. With respect to Part B of general comment of Article 25, voting and standing for election, the article requires genuine periodic elections, and there is a good bit of doctrine that has been developed with respect to what that means. Elections must be held at intervals which are not unduly long, and which also ensure the authority of government continues to be based on the free expression of the will of electors. So holding an election, announcing an election and holding it too quickly would violate this provision. Holding them too infrequently would violate this provision. One issue that I think arises here that may not be addressed in the draft is imposing term limits and also elimination of term limits on government officials that already exist. And I'll give a couple of examples of that. But the committee did have a case in my time regarding the legality of term limits, and took the position consistent, I think, with other international bodies, that term limits can help, rather than denying the ability of individuals to stand for public office or frustrating the ability of the electorate to elect who they want, that term limits can actually facilitate the responsiveness of the government to the public by preventing individuals who've accumulated substantial power from using that power to stay in office. States are obligated to take positive measures to facilitate all aspects of Article 25. And I think this is an underdeveloped area of the article. They have to take positive measures to facilitate the ability of people to vote, participate in elections, and stand for election. This includes individuals, as your draft notes, that have special needs with respect to access to participation in public life. It means that states have to take positive measures, for example, to facilitate access by women into positions of public service, where women are underrepresented, also where other groups are underrepresented. Must make access to the various aspects of Article 25 as accessible as possible, and may not impose unreasonable obstacles or barriers on participation in public life. I did want to raise, as you noted, the issue of digital interference with Article 25 issues. This includes misinformation and disinformation and so-called fake news with respect to distorting elections. It also includes foreign electoral interference. The committee's position on extraterritorial application of the covenant, I believe, would encompass acts by foreign governments that are designed to distort domestic electoral processes. And I would just flag for you the recent Oxford statement on cyber interference in elections that came out a few weeks ago that cites Article 25 for addressing this issue. To close, just briefly, I want to flag a few examples from concluding observations of aspects sort of underdeveloped aspects of Article 25. Uzbekistan in 2005, the committee addressed the fact that that general elections in Uzbekistan, both for parliament and presidential elections, lacked genuine competition. They were essentially single candidate elections. And that despite the limit on presidential terms in the Constitution, the existing president had been registered as a candidate and allowed to stand for election. In other words, he had ignored or overridden the constitutional limit on presidential terms. So these are structural issues with the design of the Uzbekistan government that the committee raised under Article 25. Similarly, Swaziland, 2007. Swaziland is the last remaining kingdom with a genuine king on the African continent. And the committee's recommendation under Article 25, or concern and recommendation, addressed both government design and corruption. The committee expressed concern that the concentration of power in the king gave him excessive powers of appointment over the government, over the parliament, over the judiciary, and was incompatible with Article 25. It noted that the state does not allow political parties, and that the domestic mechanisms for combating corruption were not independent, impartial, or effective. And so the recommendations the committee made were that the state should foster a culture of political pluralism, ensuring freedom of genuine and pluralistic political debate, and allowing the registration of opposition political parties to field candidates and participate in the formation of government, and to undertake a constitutional reform process with the objective of devolving power to democratically elected branches of government and guaranteeing the right of every citizen to take part in the conduct of public affairs and have access to public service, etc. Hungary, I don't have time, I think, to go through all aspects of the 2018 concluding observations on Hungary, but there are multiple places where the committee raised Article 25 issues with respect to Hungary. The one I wanted to flag in particular was the committee's concern with Hungary's legislative process, which is the issue that I mentioned earlier. The committee noted that many legislative reforms in Hungary had been accomplished through a process in which legislation was adopted, and the negative impact of some of the resulting legislative provisions on the protection of human rights in Hungary. It expressed concern about insufficient consultation with opposition politicians, the speed at which the legislative process was conducted, the failure to ensure the transparency of draft legislation or to allow sufficient time for deliberation, public consultation, and impact assessment, about the process of introducing substantial amendments to legislation after the close of parliamentary debate, through using of a procedure that was supposed to be used only for technical review. So the committee made a recommendation that the state party should guarantee a transparent, inclusive, and participatory process in the development of legislation, including all relevant stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. So those are examples of some of the ways in which Article 25 could be used. And I do think it's important to flag them and make those examples available to civil society organizations, because they may not be obvious ways that Article 25 could be used, but they can go to very, very core issues with respect to the capacity of a state to protect the broad swath of other human rights addressed in the Covenant and in other human rights treaties. So with that, I think I would like to leave time for discussion. So I will stop there and see if there are any comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the Article 25 of the ICCPR? Feel free to raise your hand, either by pushing the button or in your camera. I don't see anyone. All right. We can also have another round of question after Sophia's presentation. So if you have any, just note it down, and then we can have another round soon. But first of all, thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. And oh, there's one. You have a question? Okay. Please unmute and go ahead. So I can't hear you.
Maybe they could write the comment in the chat.
Yeah, can you please write your question in the chat?
Je dis que moi je suis.
Oh, thank you.
C'est bon?
Yes,
Now, is it okay now?
Yeah.
Very well. So I was saying, I'm from Benin. It's a country from the Francophone West Africa, which adhered to the ICCPR since '92, and also agreed to the protocols. What Sarah said was sufficiently clear. I just wanted to take 2 minutes to explain a situation here in Benin. In 2016, we've had a government change, and this was followed by a strong will for reforms on the partisan and political structure in our country. So these political reforms brought by in our legislation in each political party and questioned the judicial position and the judicial positioning of our parties. So they had to reposition themselves, recreate themselves. All the political parties before the reform lost their substance, their unity, 6 months after the law. So that was an issue. And this situation was created in the law and meant that for the legislative elections of 2019 in Benin, the political parties couldn't participate in the elections. So in 2019, we had 2 big political parties, one by the head of state. So the elections in Benin only had as competitor 2 political parties that supported the majority. So the consequence was that today in Benin, you have 100% of our deputies who support the head of state. So there's not one person who is against him. That's completely official since 2019 in Benin. We have 100% MPs who are with the head of state. And they represent the head of state. So this is the atmosphere. And although there's been a resolution by the African Union and also by the ECOWAS and many reactions of the international scene, we had a political dialogue organized, and this dialogue selected actors to discuss between them. So that means in November 2019, we had another way of reading the law. We had partnerships set up, and the partnership in Benin is a partnership of elected representatives. So you have a majority with 100% of the MPs, and now with all these MPs can also, from now on, for presidential elections, you need a partnership with elected representatives. So that means the elected representatives are the MPs and mayors that will be elected in 2020. That was in 2019 after the administrative elections where the president had 100% of MPs with him. And then at the same time with this constitutional revision, we had an instauration of partnerships to validate candidates for the presidential elections. So the only people possible who will be possible candidates will be from these elected representatives, from these MPs. So we've had communal elections in 2020, and many mayors were elected, and a majority of them also support our head of state. So this means in our legislation, we have a majority who can, from the majority who can decide who can be a candidate. You have 154 deputies and mayors from 160 who are with the presidential majority. So currently, this is the context of Benin. Citizens don't have a way of choosing. There is a big dynamic now going on with civil society. Since the 3rd of September, we've launched an advocacy movement called Let Me Choose, because we simply want that partnerships are not possible anymore so that people can freely be candidates. So that's really the state we are in. And this is where we are in Benin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sarah, you want to say something?
Well, I would just say that this is a very, very good example of a large problem that arises squarely under Article 25 in various ways, and that it would be very important when a country like this comes before the committee that civil society organizations bring detailed information to the committee regarding the measures that were taken to obstruct the effective advocacy by political parties as well as by the citizenry as a whole. The committee has been very, very clear that Article 25 prohibits states from adopting obstacles to participation in public life and participation in elections and participation in public service that are unreasonable and not objective, and that states must not raise barriers that obstruct such participation, which this clearly does. I mean, if you require civil society, political parties to reorganize, then you tremendously disrupt both from a freedom of association perspective and from a participation in public life perspective, the ability of that group to advocate. There have been similar observations by the committee with respect to civil society organizations. So this is not one thing that I mentioned, but the committee in multiple concluding observations has said that if states impose or erect unreasonable obstacles to the ability of civil society organizations to register or be recognized or function in the government or in the state, that is a violation of Article 25. It's not simply an Article 19 and 21 violation. For example, in Hungary, the Stop Soros legislation that imposed sanctions on civil society organizations that were advocating for refugee protection and prevented such organizations from receiving foreign funding. The committee addressed that as an Article 25 violation together with freedom of expression and association. Because it hobbled the ability of NGOs to effectively participate in public life. So thank you for raising that example.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anyone else have any question, comment? Well, thank you, Sarah. Oh, again, Sarah. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah, for your feedback. Actually, I would like you to help us in the case of Benin. We are still going through this context. Presidential elections are planned for April 2021, and the position of the civil society, so everything looks like it's just going to continue. So it's a possibility with the committee, maybe, I don't know, what support we could benefit from. We have documents, we have reports, we have evidence, and we could share it. Maybe at the end of this meeting, maybe we can rapidly interact with the committee to see how. I really want to see if there's an emergency procedure as well, because I think this is a unique case in Africa, where since 1990, we have a system of a unique party. So in Togo, in Cameroon, people are allowed to make choices. Of course, it happens that there are protests, that elections are not completely fair, but here, this is the first time that we have it to this extent. We can't choose. We are not able to choose. We're not able to make a choice. So the situation is such that if what is happening in Benin, maybe it will be too late if we wait. So I would really appreciate Sarah's support to seize the committee. And also within the CCPR, I think we have all the documents and we need support. We will have the support of civil society to make a difference in Benin, because we're really damaging democracy. It's as easy as that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before giving the floor to Sarah, I just want to mention that since if the COVID situation allows and the committee continues its review practice, actually Benin, its third review is planned in 2024. So that will be one opportunity for you to raise this issue. Hopefully with the help of this guidance we are preparing. But another opportunity would be, I think, also in line with the current initiative of the center that since Benin is a party to optional protocol, the first one, of the ICCPR, as Sarah mentioned, Article 25 is individual rights where individual communication procedure can be used. So that will be clearly an opportunity for you to raise, to bring the concrete case before the committee. And I think that will maybe Razali can also comment on the possibility of litigation on which I think we will have another webinar. So that could be something we can follow it up after this webinar. Sarah, you have any comment?
Yes, the only thing I would add to that is that unfortunately the committee has an emergency procedure on paper, but has not used it since the 90s and uses it only for very extreme situations. So essentially the two means for raising this type of issue before the committee are the two that you just mentioned, which are in the ordinary cycle of the periodic review of the state, which is currently scheduled, although for some time away from now, and also through individual communications. Another possibility might be to raise these issues before another treaty body, if another treaty body is scheduled to review Benin sooner, because of course, these are structural issues that also obstruct the ability of women and children and disabled people and others to participate in public life. And so there are other committees that could also consider these issues. And another possibility outside of the treaty body system would be to raise the issue with one or more of the UN special rapporteurs, because they actually do have the ability to engage in real time with a country and are a faster form of mechanism for bringing international attention to an issue than the periodic reviews of the treaty bodies.
Thank you very much. Rosalie, you want to say something? Please unmute yourself.
Thank you. So I think Daisuke and Sarah, you both covered all of the options that there are out there for Benin to try and find a way to address the issues. But I wanted to quickly say something. So we will have a second webinar in the beginning of December about specifically individual cases. And as Daisuke said, Benin has ratified the optional protocol to the ICCPR, so there is this possibility to bring cases to the Human Rights Committee. So in any case, I will include you in the correspondence about this second webinar, because I think it would be interesting for you to participate. And this counts for all the participants in this discussion today. If you would be interested in this second webinar, I will send you an email so you can follow that discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalie. Lambert, you have a question?
Oui. Je ne sais pas si vous m'entendez.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'm Lambert from Burundi.
Je voudrais juste d'abord m'excuser.
First of all, I would like to apologize. I didn't manage to get the interpretation right from the start. I missed a big chunk of Sarah's presentation. However, I read the concept note regarding the Article 25, and please allow me to brief you on the situation in Burundi, a country which has also ratified the ICCPR since the 1990. We have ratified a lot of international conventions, but everything that we've done regarding the respect of civil rights and political rights. I would like to talk about the crisis of 2015, which is caused by a third term of our president when he died before the end of his term. In 2017 and 2018, there's been a referendum for the revision of the constitution. And in the referendum, as you know it, we vote yes or no for the revision of the constitution. Paradoxically, those who voted no the majority of the political opposition. There were hundreds of political opponents that only had, for only infractions, was to have voted no to the revision of the constitution. And this simply was the rule, because for a referendum, you only have a choice between yes or no. They were arrested, they were mishandled, and today hundreds of people are still in prison just because they have voted no to the revision of the constitution. I think this is a clear sign of violation of Article 25. Unfortunately, I didn't follow your presentation because I didn't have the interpretation. So the constitution was amended, and now the new constitution concentrates all power on the party winning the elections. Back then, the old constitutions was making sure that a political party who could have 2% during the general elections also had the right for a seat in the government. Today, the constitution has changed, and the party in power has all power. They can elect a few members of parties, of satellite parties that are close to the power, even parties that were second, a party that was second who received a lot of voices, a lot of power, does not have any seats in the parliament. I just want to get back to the question, the most recent question. In 2019, there was a congress at the parliament, and they wanted to vote for a law that guaranteed incredible advantages to our president, but also settle him as a guide of patriotism. The parliament was against it. They said it was not normal. So we have noticed that the president violated a few human rights. And also you might know that in Burundi, there's actually some research that's been done by the UN because of violations that have been perpetrated since the start of the crisis. And recently what someone said in the parliament, that the old president was a bad governor, that he governed in a wrong way. This person is now in prison. So this person has been thrown into prison just for saying the president perpetrated wrongdoings. So we need to make sure that it's actually still true today that presidents can't be perpetrated in front of a tribunal if they have carried out any wrongdoings during their term. This is actually still a law nowadays, although those people who declare the wrongdoings can be put in prison just for their declarations. This has been the case last October. People are in prison because they voted no to the law, which gave impunity and great advantages to the president forever. This applies forever. So just because I've had to speak French and I didn't follow the presentation, I don't know if this is actually also against Article 25. I don't know what you think about that. The CSOs were either dismantled or suspended. So it would be very useful to have them on our side. Currently, the organizations that still exist are very closely followed. They are not allowed to implement directing organs, directing bodies, because they need to be approved by the ministry. So this is a violation, of course. Each year, these organizations need to be approved by the government. So the CSOs that denounce, that go against, that declare that there are abuses, after 1 year, these CSOs will be replaced because the government doesn't approve of them, doesn't approve of their existence. So just because I didn't get the chance to follow the presentation, that's all I wanted to share with you, for you to let me know, does this violate Article 25, yes or no? Thank you so much for your replies.
Thank you. Shara, you want to comment?
I would say yes. I mean, there are a number of other violations in there also. And so, for example, a politically motivated prosecution or a prosecution of an individual for speech criticizing the government, I would say at its core is an Article 19 freedom of expression violation, as well as an Article 14 unfair trial violation. But if this is done systematically, it would also give rise to an Article 25 violation. And certainly the other obstacles, the structural obstacles to civil society engagement would implicate Article 25.
Thank you. Yeah, for those who joined later on this meeting, and if you need interpretation, you have the button in the bottom. But anyway, thank you, Shara, and thank you, Lomber, for your comments. Through the presentation of Sarah and also cases brought up by the colleagues from Benin and Burundi, it became quite clear. Actually, not actually, but a lot of issues could be actually raised under Article 25, and especially in relation to the other articles of ICCPR. There are so many cases and issues that could be actually, for that, Article 25 could be used. But as Sarah also mentioned, that fact may not be obvious so far. And the fact that committee hasn't had so many cases in the observations or individual cases is not solely because of the fact that it's not happening, but probably mostly because information hasn't reached the committee yet in that way. And that was also the purpose of the initiative of the center and the purpose of the guidelines prepared by Sophia to help civil society to effectively address it. So may I give the floor to Sophia to present the guidelines?
Okay, can you all hear me now? Perfect. All right, so yeah, as mentioned earlier, I was the one who was responsible for doing the research that will lead to the production of the guidelines and the draft that I think you all have been provided a copy of already. Just a brief terms of structure of what I will talk about today. It will follow largely along the line of the drafts you should all have already been provided with. So I'll give you an overview of the methodology views and kind of arguing what we did aim to do and what we didn't aim to do. And also give you some cursory overview of our data, what it looked like, as well as some individual results along with the thematic clusters we identified, and then some key findings that will apply specifically to across all the data and more so in line with the meta trends that we identified. So starting off with methodology, I think it's important to first emphasize that objective was not necessarily to look at the question of why, but rather what is and what isn't in the state of the Human Rights Committee's jurisprudence on the right to participate in public affairs. And the project largely proceeded in threefold. First, we collected data along with 201 concluding observations, which were all the concluding observations that were issued between 2000 and 2010. And this encompassed a total of 57 sessions. From that, we briefly analyzed. And from this analysis, we adopted thematic clusters on the basis of the data, which I think is a really important thing to bear in mind when you do look at the results, is that we adopt our thematic clusters on the basis of the data rather than on an analysis of the Article 25 as itself. So if we don't have any zero clusters in that sense, so if you do identify any thematic omissions, that could be really useful in letting me know about. A second thing to bear in mind is that there is some significant overlap between interrelated rights when we talk about Article 25, so do not look at frequency statistics with too much robustness. There's indeed a possibility that those issues are more commonly considered under another right. And then as a final step for some of the work we did was also to do a comparative analysis to look at how the Human Rights Committee covered a specific issue that's also covered by another treaty body, such as the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But then moving on to perhaps the more interesting aspects, which is the data. Like I earlier established, we had 201 concluding observations, and in these 201 concluding observations, we identified as many as 402 issues that were raised under the right to participate in public affairs. And these issues occurred in respect to 130 states and 178 concluding observations. That means that when the Human Rights Committee raises Article 25, it does so rather frequently, at a rate of 88% in the time frame we looked at. It can also bear to note that most mentions were issued under another paragraph rather than being considered separately on their own. In terms of omissions, we did only note in 170 concluding observation, which means that roughly around 30 concluding observations did not contain references to Article 25. If you look at the full list of these states, it's not immediately obvious why they weren't necessarily considered from Article 25 perspective, but perhaps as the earlier speaker mentioned, this might simply be of a lack of provision of information by civil society. We can also see that it is considered across our region, but most dominantly in the case of Africa, but also in terms of Europe and Asia. In terms of consideration over time between 2000 and 2016, you can see that Article 25 is rather comprehensively considered with a bit of a small increase over time with some dips and peaks, largely in line probably with what states were considering during those years. In 2016, there's a very striking increase between 2016 and 2017. Really, it's a really striking increase in the amount of time that's considered. If you look at the data of this time period, you will note that it's not necessarily the fact that it's being considered more often, but rather that there's a greater variety of issues that are being adopted under Article 25. And this increase in time also holds under all our thematic clusters that we identified. And talking about those thematic clusters, like I mentioned earlier, we identified these on the basis of the data, and we were able to find 16 core thematic clusters readily identifiable, which we grouped the data into. And we will return to the individual results of some of these later, so you don't necessarily have to read through every single thematic cluster we identified now. We've grouped them into 3 main sections, which I will followingly talk about. But what really bears to note is that the issue of women's participation remains the most dominant issue that is considered by the Human Rights Committee with respect to the right to participate in public affairs. Indeed, with 138 mentioned, it's roughly 1/3 of all considerations of Article 25. In second is minority groups. When you combine it with indigenous peoples, it reaches 88 mentions, which also is a considerable stake of all examinations. Then moving on to our first grouping, our first group served to reflect those clusters that are related to periodic elections to democracy, which is in essence just serves to reflect the notion, the very intuitive notion of public participation as electoral participation, and which, although it's not the only remit of Article 25, it is perhaps still the most dominant way and the most pervasive way in which citizens today participate in public processes. So perhaps unsurprisingly in this consideration, it was the biggest group we had. Indeed, we have 8 clusters under this theme. We have the right to stand for elections, also known as passive suffrage. We have the right to vote. We have the registration and participation of public associations, which includes both civil society organizations and prominently political parties. We have independent electoral authorities such as electoral management bodies or electoral commissions. We have free, transparent, and fair elections, electoral violence and intimidation, as well as campaign financing. I won't necessarily have time to go into detail into every cluster, given that we do have quite a few. But throughout this presentation, I'll try to highlight a few key results, either because of their subject matter or because of the results were particularly compelling. So starting off with the right to stand for elections, the right to stand for elections were really considered from an approach on whether there exists undue restrictions on the right to stand. The subject when the Human Rights Committee talks about the right to stand for elections is almost always opposition political candidates, which primarily makes sense in the context of the right. It bears to note that when you compare the right to stand for election with the right to vote for election, you will very quickly notice that the right to vote for elections is considered very comprehensively in terms of very special and social groups, but that doesn't necessarily apply to right to stand for elections, where, for example, the right to stand for election of persons with disabilities has largely been neglected by the Human Rights Committee. And then going back to the right to vote, we can see that it is a lot about these positive measures that enables the effective exercise of the right to vote. And of course, issues such as universal suffrage and the very precondition for voting, the existence and holding of timely elections. Like I noticed, there's a lot of special and social groups considered under this right, but I think it's still possible to infer that there are certain groups that have not been considered. The Human Rights Committee's jurisprudence does recognize that residency requirements cannot bar homeless people from participating in voting procedures and elections, but that is still the case in a lot of states today, and it has yet to be raised, at least under our time frame of conversation, in a single concluding observation. Another interesting cluster is also electoral violence and intimidation. I think undoubtedly at first glance, 36 mentions in 20 years might seem a bit low, but it's important to note that it can be really hard to distinguish an incident of electoral violence from an incident of organized violence of any other kind. So it's not necessarily that these numbers are exactly representative, so I think that's important to bear in mind. And when we talk about the committee's approach, we'll notice that electoral violence intimidation really focuses about the use and threat of violence, while we at the same time know that harassment and intimidation is far more common and occurs in roughly 50% of all electoral processes. So there is a bit of a comparative neglect of the intimidation part of this cluster. But yeah, that's the findings of our first subgroup in very brief. And our second subgroup is the political environment, which really serves to reflect this notion that you can only guarantee the right to participate in public affairs if you have an environment that is conducive to that right. So it's very much about contextual considerations. And herein we have 5 rights in particular. We have the media environment and access to information. We have freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, corruption, and political pluralism. The first 3, if you look at the Human Rights Committee's approach, and under this subgrouping, is very much still related to electoral processes. When Article 25 is referenced with respect to any of these 3, it's generally because of reported irregularities in connection to any of these 3 in electoral processes. When you look at the first of them, media environment and access to information, you'll see that a lot of the Human Rights Committee's approach deals with ensuring a balanced access to media. And this media is very prominently state television sources. And it is also in a secondary consideration about whether there is access to information in public interest, and particularly the transparency of such processes. What we don't see really considered is also, as pointed out yesterday, is perhaps the internet and the internet's role in ensuring access to information versus disinformation, as well as the functioning of private media, particularly in states where state television media is non-existent or doesn't play as big of a role. In terms of freedom of expression and assembly, we typically will see a recalling of the fact that there are essential conditions for the effective exercise of the right to vote and the participation in public affairs more broadly. Both of them also deals very much with the approach of whether they exist under reasonable restrictions and whether these restrictions were necessary, proportionate, and objective. And you will also note that it might seem that they are raised quite infrequently, 5 and 4 respectively, but this is also because they're rights in their own right, which means that they're not necessarily always considered under the perspective of Article 25. With the latter two, we're talking about more so the public life more generally. So in both corruption, as opposed to the free, fair elections group earlier, which deals exclusively with reported irregularities in election, corruption deals with reports of corruption in public life as a whole, and the same largely applies to political pluralism. When it comes to political pluralism, the phrasing we typically see is simply that the state should take efforts to promote political pluralism, which is a rather broad statement. Moving on to special and social groups. As earlier established, there are certain groups who need specific measures to be able to participate in public processes, and this specific subgrouping seeks to deal with these groups of people. And we have in particular identified 4 groups. We have women that, as earlier mentioned, were the most dominant group across all cluster teams in the entire data sample. We also have minority and marginal groups, persons with disabilities, as well as persons deprived of their liberty. When it comes to the human rights consideration of women, it's almost always from a representational perspective. So it deals with what particular percentage, for example, women have been elected to a particular public body or is employed in a particular public body. Less really, we'll see more general statements such as the promotion of participation or temporary special measures that the state should perhaps take to promote and ensure that women are represented in public processes. When we come to minority and marginalized groups, one of the biggest subgroups within is really Indigenous people, and ensuring that Indigenous people are properly consulted in any decision-making process that may refer to them. But we also see more broadly, for example, access to political participation. So you might have to deal with linguistic barriers of a specific ethnic minority, or the enfranchisement more generally. We also have persons with disability, and here we deal with 2 specific issues most likely in the Human Rights Committee's approach, which is first off, the unreasonable deprivation of legal capacity, including the right to vote, as well as the specific enabling measures that are needed to ensure that persons with disabilities have the right to vote in practice. If you cross-reference here, quite interesting, if you cross-reference person with disabilities, the coverage by the Human Rights Committee versus what disability organizations says that concretely needs to be put in place in order for all groups of persons with disabilities to vote, you'll notice that there's perhaps some shortcomings in the committee's consideration. We see that there is little consideration of the accessibility of electoral media, as well as training for polling staff in how to, you might have regulation procedures on how to deal with persons with disabilities, but in practice, polling staff may remain unaware of these. And we also have very little talk about the civic and voter education necessary to make sure that persons with disabilities can have their access to the right to vote or the right to stand for elections, for example. Our final group were persons deprived of their liberty, which really deals with detainees and convicts, and most commonly in almost all cases, this had to do with the blanket ban on detainees from voting, which still applies in a large majority of states, not necessarily majority, but a large number of states. What we don't see considered is the right to vote of pretrial detainees, which is recognized by Human Rights Committee as having the right to vote of pretrial detainees, but this is not considered in the time period of consideration. And then moving finally on to the key findings from these individual findings, I believe we've already established point number 4, which is that there are certain underdeveloped areas within the Human Rights Committee jurisprudence, which is also, I believe, an exercise that you all can further help us identify and understand. Beyond that, we also see that there is an adoption of inconsistent legal basis. To briefly refer to women's participation, you might see the limited participation of women in public life with identical wording, and in some cases, this wording will reference Article 25, sometimes it won't, and sometimes it will reference Article 25 in conjunction with other articles. It is not always clear necessarily why one approach is adopted over another, so that remains relatively inconsistent. In second, we also see that there's quite a broad oscillation between the broad and the detailed approach. To once again use the example of women's participation, sometimes you will simply see a very general statement of the low participation of women in public life. Other times you will see the low participation of women in various public bodies with specific percentages of their participation or employment in those public bodies. In third, we also see that there is a bit of a common tendency not to raise examples. So the committee will very broadly encourage the state in question to take measures to bring the issue area of concern in line with the covenant, but very rarely does it raise exactly the examples of steps to take or temporary special measures to adopt in order to ensure that these rights are guaranteed. So with those 4 findings, I've come to the end of my presentation, and I hope I didn't go over too quickly or too briefly or anything. So do let me know if you have any questions or considerations about our research.
Thank you, Sophia. That was also quite interesting analysis and definitive findings. Does anyone have any question on the presentation of Sophia? If there is any, this is really a chance for you to raise. Yes, Sarah?
So just while others are thinking, thank you, Sophia, for the really excellent presentation. I may be able to shed a little light on some of the inconsistencies you found, but I think some of the issues you flag are extremely helpful. I think in general, the committee historically has addressed issues relating to persons with disabilities less, and also children, less than it has, for example, with respect to women, which it had been addressing for many years. Now, I think with the active engagement of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the committee is more likely to simply note an issue and leave it to that committee to address the issue in detail if the state is subject to review before that committee. The committee has also increasingly tried to defer women's issues to the CEDAW committee. And so I think in recent years, you've probably seen more brief and generic engagement on the issue of participation of women in public life than you would have perhaps in the past. But the issue of people in pretrial detention not voting, that's a very important thing to flag for the committee, because there's no other committee that would have core jurisdiction over that issue. And then with respect to whether issues reference Article 25 or not in a string of articles in concluding observations, I think that's just inconsistency and sloppiness on the part of the committee. It means that the person from the Secretariat drafting the concluding observations and the rapporteur didn't notice it, and no one on the committee noticed it, and so the article wasn't mentioned. But I don't think it's any more significant than that, which means that the numbers that you address may to some extent undercount issues that the committee has raised that it would normally consider to have been implicated by Article 25. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Sophia, you want to say something to that?
I don't have really anything to immediately reflect, but it was really useful kind of further feedback to really explore also maybe a bit more of the why certain issues are raised rather than simply noting what is and what isn't. So thank you for that.
Right. Does anyone else have any question, comment? If not, yeah, Leah?
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I joined quite late, but I think just to say that from a Zambian experience, I think the effort that was made by the center to just get views from across the world on issues related to maybe countries' implementation of the ICCPR, but then also availing a platform for local CSOs to engage with the committee. I think that's kind of like really good, because oftentimes we find that maybe the work of the Human Rights Committee is not well understood at the local level where it matters. At the community level, people don't know that they can track certain human rights violations and be able to engage in that process so that they can have that prominence. So I think for Zambia, it was like the first time we were coordinated as civil society organizations to make input into that. And I think it also speaks to some of the findings where maybe there might be inconsistencies, but then also where you see, again, still widespread disparities many years after the convention, for instance, was ratified by our own government. And I think there's often a disjoint as well. You find that governments are more accountable externally than internally within their jurisdiction, because they feel the citizens are not engaging. They don't even know the commitments that they have made at that level. And because, again, the committee is maybe not on the ground, there's some information that might, miss the committee. So I think having this kind of platforms puts us on the same page.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I quickly react to that?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think, Leah, what you mentioned is exactly why we are making this draft and why we are organizing this webinar, and why I will speak a bit about the advocacy with the Human Rights Committee, just so that everyone in this discussion really knows what we are talking about, how this review cycle looks like, how civil society can participate. Because I think once you have that information, you really have everything to be able to give us your view on the draft, your feedback, and your opinion on how it can be improved. So this will, I think you'll get the full picture after this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lazare. It's true.
All right, thank you, Lian. Thank you, Lazare. If anyone else doesn't have any question or comment at this point, I would suggest to take a 10 minutes break. Agree? Okay. So we will come back. Now it's, what time is it now in Central Europe time? It's
10:57.
Then in 10 minutes, meaning 11:07.
Yeah.
We'll be back on sharp. All right.
Later.
See you in 10 minutes. let's resume our webinar. And now I would like to give the floor to Razarif, who will present advocacy in relation to state reviews. Razarif, please go ahead.
Thank you. First, I wanted to thank Sarah Cleveland for the very clear overview of what Article 25 entails and how the committee has looked at it from an inside perspective. It's very interesting for us to hear that information. And also to Sophia for presenting the draft. I think we all have a very clear idea now of what is in there and also of what is not in there. And maybe to quickly repeat, so after my presentation, which I will keep as short as possible, the idea is really to have a discussion together. So if you have any feedback on this draft on how to improve it, if there are aspects from, let's say, the situation in your country that are not included in the draft, please let us know because it would be very interesting. So what I will do now is go into how advocacy can be done with the Human Rights Committee. Because, so as I said, we want to add a chapter to this draft on how to submit information or how to engage with the Human Rights Committee more in general. And we want to hear from you which information you need. So if you have participated with a treaty body before and you have encountered some challenges, for example, it would be very interesting for us to hear about that because we then can include some information about that in the draft. I will try to share my screen. Okay, can anyone confirm that you can see it? Yes, okay, great. So to start from the very basic level, there are 9 core human rights treaties, and they each have a corresponding treaty body that monitors the implementation of its own treaty. And so we will look today at the ICCPR and the Human Rights Committee. But there are more. What does a treaty body do? They have 3 main functions, but they also do some other things. And the thing for us today that is important is the examination of state reports. So when a state ratifies a treaty, they have the obligation to regularly submit reports to that treaty body. Then this treaty body will look at how this state is implementing the treaty. They also consider individual complaints. So that is what Sarah also mentioned for Benin, for example. If your state has agreed to it, the committee has also the competence to review individual cases. So if a citizen feels like their human rights are violated, if certain conditions are fulfilled, they can submit a case to the Human Rights Committee directly. And this is the subject of our second webinar, so I will not go into this into detail today. And then the last one is they also issue general comments, and general comments are basically a way of explaining what, how a certain article is interpreted according to the committee. So as Sarah was explaining, there is a general comment on Article 25, and that general comment really explains what this article entails. They also do some other tasks, but we won't go into those today. A bit more information on the Human Rights Committee itself. So the Human Rights Committee is the body that is monitoring the ICCPR. It consists of 18 members, and they meet for 3 sessions a year, and in those sessions they do the tasks that I just mentioned. In usual circumstances, they meet physically in Geneva. It has been online for a few times, but we hope that 2021 will be back to physical meetings. Let's see. Now I wanted to give you a bit more background on the state review process, because I think it's useful to have that information when reading the draft also. So everything begins with the ratification by a state. And when the state has ratified a treaty, as I said, this reporting obligation starts, and states have to regularly submit reports that explain how they are implementing that treaty. So that is the state report. And then the state will be scheduled for review by the Human Rights Committee. After the review, the Human Rights Committee will adopt recommendations for that state. And then after this one cycle, the whole cycle starts again with another state report that is due after a few years. What is LOI? LOI stands for List of Issues. So after a state report is submitted to the Human Rights Committee, the Human Rights Committee will adopt what we call LOI, or List of Issues. And this list of issues is basically a list of questions addressed to the state. So usually it's questions like, what are the measures you are taking to ensure that women are equally represented in political life, for example. So these are questions addressed to the state that then the state has to answer to, and then the review will be scheduled. So that's basically what a list of issues is. And then there's the implementation phase. So after the recommendations are adopted, it's basically the phase that is most important at the national level on how the state should implement these recommendations. How can the state better implement the actual treaty? And in this implementation phase, there is also some follow-up by the Human Rights Committee. So usually the Human Rights Committee chooses a few priority topics or priority recommendations that are then included in a follow-up procedure. And this follow-up procedure is again the state that submits a follow-up report to explain how it has been implementing these 3 or 4 priority topics. Now, there is also another procedure that is called simplified procedure that doesn't work with an LOI or a list of issues, but a list of issues prior to reporting, or LOI-PR. Why is that? As you can see in the previous slide, I mean, there are a lot of reports that are due by states. And there is a state report, then they have to answer to the list of issues, and then they have to also submit a follow-up report, and they have to do this for each treaty that they have ratified. So that's a lot of work. And in order to address this, the Human Rights Committee has adopted what is called the simplified reporting procedure. And this, as you can see, the state report and the LOI-PR switched places. So in this LOI-PR procedure, the list of issues is adopted, and the state report is actually the reply to that list of issues prior to reporting. So that means that one state report is actually removed. So the reporting burden is lower in this simplified procedure. This is just to explain what possible procedures there are, because I will go into some of the specific countries that you work in. So I just wanted to give you that overview that this simplified procedure also exists. And there is also this implementation phase. Now, what can civil society do? So I go back to the LOI procedure because it's easier to grasp. Where or at which phase can civil society engage? Basically, all the time at every phase of this procedure. So if you want to simplify it in your head, there are 3 important phases. There is before the review, which includes this list of issues. There is during the review, which is in Geneva or online, maybe in the future. And there is this follow-up phase after the review. So 3 important phases, and civil society can basically participate in all of them. And what I always say is that every time a state can submit a report, civil society can do so as well. So where you see state report, this is also where civil society can submit an alternative report, going into which issues are important, and specifically for civil society that is working on a specific issue like Article 25, submitting a report before the adoption of the list of issues can be very important, because you can really influence or yeah, make yourself be heard from the beginning of the process, and make sure there are questions included in the list of issues on that topic. So that's the first moment where you can participate. You can obviously also participate during the review, and the center, for example, organizes briefings with committee members. So that's also something you can do. You can also reply in written to the list of issues. So these questions are addressed to the state, but as Sarah also said, it's very useful for committee members to receive alternative reports going into these issues, so that you actually have reliable information that can be used in the review. And then when the recommendations are published, and a few years later, there is the follow-up phase. Again, so I said the state can submit a follow-up report, and civil society as well, on these priority recommendations. So basically, civil society can participate at any phase of this process. And what I wanted to do now is go into some of your countries. I tried to note down the countries where you all are working on, but if there is a country that I'm missing, please let me know and I can do a quick search on where the countries are in this review cycle by the Human Rights Committee. So Benin was a country that we already mentioned in the discussion, has been reviewed in 2015. And the next cycle hasn't started yet. So I would say that this is the most difficult timing for a country to be in, for civil society to actually do something, because that new cycle hasn't started yet and the other one has already finished. But as Sarah and Daisuke both very clearly said, there are other treaty bodies you can participate with. There are the special procedures that you can address, and you can also submit individual communications. So that's some of the options when you're in the middle of two cycles. Burundi is actually a very, it's a very good moment for you to engage, because the list of issues will be adopted in March 2021. So you have some time now to prepare a report for the list of issues. So if you want to make sure Article 25 issues are taken into account, now is the moment to prepare your report. If you are planning to do so, we'll be in touch, or let us know, and we can arrange that together. And the review is planned for future sessions. We don't know the exact date, but it will be soon, in the coming years, the first years to come. Another country is Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is a bit in the same situation as Benin. So the previous review has been carried out. The next one hasn't started yet. Kenya is also a very good moment to engage, because the list of issues is available. It has been adopted in a previous session, and Kenya will most likely be reviewed in March as well. So in this list of issues, there are several questions specifically on Article 25, participation of women, corruption. So it's a very good moment to prepare a report. Kyrgyzstan, the list of issues for Kyrgyzstan was adopted now in this session. It hasn't, so in the October session, it hasn't been published yet, but it will be published soon. And the review will also be in future sessions. So I'm guessing 2021. So also a very good moment to have a look at that list of issues and see if you can contribute some information to the Human Rights Committee. Then we have Philippines, same situation. So the list of issues is available. There are questions on elections and participation in public affairs, which you can reply to, and the review is scheduled for future sessions. Sri Lanka, same situation. LOI is available. There are questions on participation in public affairs, and the review is scheduled for future sessions. Tunisia is a bit different. Tunisia has been reviewed in March 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So we are at the end of one cycle. There will be a follow-up procedure, so we can have a look at whether you can participate in that follow-up procedure. But after that follow-up procedure, this cycle will end, and then the next one will be in a few years' time. And then lastly, Zambia is the same situation as Kyrgyzstan. So the list of issues was adopted in the October session of the Human Rights Committee. It will be available soon, will be published, I guess, in a few days, weeks' time. And the review is scheduled for future sessions. So the perfect moment to have a look at that list of issues and formulate your replies and collect some information to engage with the Human Rights Committee. My PowerPoint is a bit longer than this, but I think that we can stop here. I will share the PowerPoint with all the participants in any case. And I think it's better if we can now move to the discussion to make sure that we can integrate all of your feedback or comments or anything you want to share with us. So I will stop my screen share. Yes. So is there anyone that would like to share with us, if you have read the draft and you have heard Sophia's presentation and Sarah's presentation, and you feel like some aspects are not covered when you look at your own country's situation, for example, do you feel like sharing that with us?
Thank you, Rosalie. And everyone, this is the moment you can have your questions and comments being listened and reflected into our guidelines. So please feel free to come up with any comments. And I think concrete cases from the country will be really helpful to make the guidelines more relevant and effective and useful for you all. So please feel free to raise your hands. Lombo? Lambert, you can go ahead, unmute yourself and you can speak.
Merci beaucoup. Merci de me repasser.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak again. I really followed with a lot of interest the different presentations, and at some point you spoke about women, discrimination against women, and different minority categories of people who need to participate in public life, people with disabilities as well. In Burundi, in the region of the Great Lakes, there is another category of people that are very vulnerable. And I would say that their rights are always violated. They are sometimes even killed. I'm talking here about albino people. There's very few of them. I would say about 1,000 people, but they are not respected. And according to the information, or according to what people say, some sorcerers, some societies and traditional actors use albino people, their blood in different magical procedures, etc. So it's really incredible what they do with them. It's really violating their human rights. So I'm wondering if we can do something for these albino people to include them in the life of a country. How could we develop, how could we make sure that these people are protected by the national law? So far, we don't have any law protecting them. They are currently living hidden in Tanzania and Burundi, and many people tell us that wizards use their blood for different witchcraft acts, which are beyond me. But anyway, I think they need international protection. I think this is an ideal example. I think the case of these albino people could be included so that these are the people who need international protection and who need their rights protected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's definitely one of the vulnerable groups for whose rights and whose protection should be raised at international level, and not only with regard to Article 25, their right to participate, but also more broadly in terms of non-discrimination and also discriminatory practice, and lack of law is another thing. So I think that will be really great opportunity to raise it in your report, for example, for list of issues and also coming reviews. But as Sarah and Nazari also stressed, ICCPR is not the only opportunity for you to raise that issue. So there will be, for example, I think you can also raise it with SOAD, the Committee on Racial Discrimination, although its racial discrimination definition is might be something different, but I think it's still possible. And also, if you think about albino women, you can definitely raise it with CEDAW and also albino children. Of course, the Committee on the Rights of the Child. And UPR is definitely another opportunity. Special procedures also. So it's great that you raised that issue, and that is something we can definitely pay attention to in the future. Does anyone else have any comments on the guidelines, inputs to improve? Please feel free to raise any comments because your inputs are really...
I think Almeg wants to speak.
Yeah, please go ahead. Almeg?
Almeg, vous avez la parole.
Ralmeg, you have the floor. I wanted to mention, oh, the interpreter can't hear. The interpreter cannot hear. Ralmeg, the connection is...
Ralmeg, interpreter cannot hear you. Maybe it's because of the internet. Maybe you can try to turn off your video and speak into the microphone. Ralmeg, go ahead.
Je mentionnais en fait l'intérêt.
I've mentioned the... yes, I mentioned my interest for the documents in French. And this morning's presentation by Sarah, it would be interesting to have a French version. And I also wanted to ask for countries like Benin, there are very specific needs. Maybe it could be advisable for, as Sarah mentioned, maybe we could have a special rapporteur. In order to react to the urgent situation in Benin with the upcoming elections. Maybe we would like to receive urgent help in emergency with the special rapporteur, and the elections are upcoming, and it would be important to have it as well. The situation is an emergency, so maybe the CCPR can help contact with the special rapporteur in order to be able to act quickly.
Thank you. Yes, special rapporteur, if you already have written information ready, I think it will be a good idea to send it to the special rapporteurs, not only one, but also special rapporteurs having mandates that relates to this issue, known like freedom of peaceful assembly, association, expression, etc., etc. Because then those special rapporteurs or working groups included can issue a joint urgent appeal or similar kind. So that will be definitely one way. And if any minority groups are particularly affected in that context, then you could also approach the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which has urgent action procedure. So they might be able to react more quickly than the other treaty bodies. Yeah. And of course, as I mentioned before, the litigation and individual communication is another way, which I recommend to also for you to follow up with Razari and with the next coming workshop. Razari, you want to add something?
I think if you really want specific support in which special procedures should I address or how do I find their contact information, please don't hesitate. You can email me after this workshop and we can work it out together because I think it's very important. As Daisuke says, for the individual communications, we can do this webinar in the beginning of September, where December, where we can invite you to participate as well. You might get some interesting information there, and then you might be able to proceed with some individual cases. On the French versions of all the material, I totally understand that it's very important. We are trying to move some steps in that direction, for example, with the French interpretation that we have today. And the final version of the guide will be translated into French as well. But we just don't have the budget to translate draft versions because we do have to have official translators work on that. And if it's only for a first draft, and then every version has to be translated into French, we cannot, we unfortunately don't have the budget. We would love to, but it's unfortunately out of our hands. But the final version of the draft will be in French and we can send it to you once we have it.
Thank you. And also about the French version, even if we don't have the draft in French, as Razari said, we will have the final version in French, and that is also not the end of the process. So if you have any comments on the final version, you can still send it to us, and we will try to find a way to address it in the coming future. Does anyone have any other comment, questions?
If no one has a general comment, maybe I want to ask you a more specific one that will help us to establish this additional chapter on how to submit reports. So have any of you already engaged with the Human Rights Committee or other treaty bodies or other UN mechanisms? And if you did, what were the main challenges for you? Was it that there was a lack of information? Was it that there was a lack of a contact person? Was it that you just didn't know? What kind of information would you really need in order to use these mechanisms effectively?
Everyone, please feel free to raise your hand. No one? Well, this will be a really great opportunity for us to listen to your voices, and especially to identify the actual needs you face on the ground, and to reflect it on it in our guidelines, but also in other practices. So please feel free to raise any comments.
Or if you haven't participated with any of these UN mechanisms, why is that? Is that a question of budget? Is that a question of you were not aware you could participate with them? Any insight on that?
Leah?
Thank you. I think for the case of Zambia, really, it's just inadequate awareness that has been made for CSOs to understand. Like for most of the CSOs that participated, for instance, in the drafting of the list of issues, they didn't even know what the list of issues is and how the process is done. So I think the reality is that certain civil society organizations have actually closed up. We have new organizations that are coming on board. So the aspect of capacity building and awareness creation of the different treaties, the bodies, as well as the work of the Human Rights Committee must be an ongoing work. And of course, then attached to that is the issues of the budget. Then secondly, again, you find that, for instance, in the case of Zambia, where more than 80% of the poor, the vulnerable, are in rural areas, you find that their issue, if you sit with them today and then you ask them what the priority concern is, they'll say it's to find a meal, whether it's one meal for that day. So they're a bit removed to the change that would come with engaging with maybe the Human Rights Committee, because to them, they don't even know that maybe that body exists. So I think there's also need for capacity building for the local CSOs, grassroots CSOs, the women, for them to understand the change that might come from engaging with the Human Rights Commission. That said, if there are good examples of organizations from other countries that have participated, sharing that as experiences, as stories would encourage as well CSOs in other countries that are unable to participate. So I think this process is one way in which we are going to, address that gap. But I think there's a little bit more that needs to happen outside, for instance, the reporting timelines, in between what can be happening, how can we monitor implementation, how can we share and sensitize so that it's less elitist and it's made more localized. It would even explain why, for instance, some of the treaties, I think, are not performing well because there's that disjoint with the ordinary person there.
Thank you. That's really important input. We definitely take it into account. And in terms of the capacity building and awareness raising, just for your information, we do have guidelines on NGO participation in the ICCPR process in general, which we actually also updating. So there will be also new version coming, if not in December, maybe early 2021. And due to the COVID, we cannot travel freely right now, but that's where we can utilize online platform to do a workshop and to do capacity building and awareness raising. For example, in this way, but that will be also requiring necessary technical facilities available. But definitely, we will also try our best to address that. And remote area and also gap in the reviews. That's also, we are trying our best to how to address it. And that's where we also encourage the more holistic utilization of UN systems, not only one treaty body, but looking at them as a whole. And even if one treaty body cannot review this one state regularly, maybe there are other bodies doing so. And we are happy to help you develop strategy on it too. Razari or Sophia, you want to add any comments?
Yeah, I think it's as you say. So this is basically, I think, one of the reasons why we exist as an organization, to do this capacity building, to make sure that civil society is aware of these processes, knows how to use the mechanisms, and do these trainings. COVID has made it all a bit difficult. But that is our main goal, to improve that. And as you say, I think it's a very important point. If most of the population is living in rural areas, it's very important to find a way to include them as well. If it's the majority, they also have to learn this awareness and be aware of their rights. So that's definitely something that we are trying to work on.
Thank you. Gordian, do you have any comment? Please go ahead. You can speak. Unmute yourself, and then you can take the floor.
Bonjour.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes.
Hello?
Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
On vous entend bien.
We can all hear you.
Donc je m'appelle Gordien. Je suis
Gordien from Burundi. I wanted to express some challenges of the civil society in terms of participation with some treaty organizations. For example, the case of forced disappearance of people, kidnapping. We're working on some themes, but sometimes once cases have been documented in Burundi of people who were who've disappeared, we send a copy to the work group of the UN about cases of people who have disappeared, who've been kidnapped, and then we receive a form to fill in, and sometimes it's very difficult to fill in because we don't have a lot of personnel, a lot of people available to work on the topic, and sometimes the information that they request on the form were already submitted in our first report. So sometimes there's a challenge in terms of human resources and means in some treaty organizations. Sometimes also we don't have the means to work with the working group, and also sometimes we don't have the means to work to engage with other treaty organizations like the Council of Europe, for example. But these are some examples These are some examples of challenges for our optimal engagement with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudian. And that is also a legitimate point. And we are also exactly here because of that concern. Some of the UN bodies might not have easy to fill in form or way to approach. And we also need to take the balance of making the process easy, but also ensuring that necessary information is provided accurately. So to some extent, the form is necessary to ensure the information is provided, but we are trying to make the process and approach as easy as possible. Yeah, but in any case, that is really important point we have taken into account too. And also lack of human resource and financial resource is definitely we all share, I think, including the center. That's where I think the joint action, joint efforts of civil society organizations and partners becomes really crucial and important. So feel free to be in touch with us, and we will do our best, and you do our your best. We can do our best, and jointly, maybe something can come out from that joint effort. Anyone? Lazari or Sophia, you want to add something?
Maybe Sophia, you can make some sort of analysis of the feedback.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I think it's always interesting to hear about, for example, you know, the case of albino people and all these issues that weren't necessarily addressed, but can always be used to add more to the report and make it more comprehensive. So I just want to thank everyone for their initial feedback so far.
Thank you. I have some comments. Okay, Irene said you have participated in the CEDAW process. I think that's definitely one way you can also build upon. If you have also, if you encounter any difficulty in there, you can also communicate with us. That might be also a common problem in terms of participation in ICCPR process. So feel free.
Maybe Irene, if you don't mind sharing a bit what that experience was like, submitting your shadow report to CEDAW. You say you didn't travel to present your findings, but others did. Did these others, yeah, what was their experience like? Did they feel like they were heard? Or, yeah, anything?
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but there is a kind of noise louder than your voice.
And now, is it okay?
Yes.
Thank you. So yeah, we submitted the CEDAW shadow report in 2016, if I can remember that year, I think so, which we did with other partners, but I didn't participate in the presentation itself in Geneva, but yeah, others did. And they also, even in addition to presenting their findings, they also did side events to make sure that they also bring in other countries to understand what Kenya is going is getting to in terms of what it is presenting in the shadow report. and also just sharing experiences to the implementation of these treaties in Kenya. So they did so many, I think several side events to it. And yes, they were hard. I have not been able, I think I need to follow up and just see what recommendations were, but yeah, they were hard, and they submitted it confidently. And I think I think I need to get to understand what particular recommendations that came from particular issues that the CSOs did raise with the treaty. Yeah. But it was a very, very good experience.
Thank you. Great to hear that. And that reminds me also of one important aspect of the process. It's about the confidentiality. Not only about this Article 25, but also on many of the civil and political rights that could be quite sensitive in countries. And those people or persons who raise issues with the international bodies are often facing reprisals. And so there is also an opportunity for you to submit information in confidential manner. So if any of you are facing that kind of problem and risk, feel also free to let us know or submit the information in a confidential manner to the committee too. And Irene also said whether this was the first time filing a report on Article 25. I think there are many reports touching up on Article 25 so far, but this will be the first initiative in attempt of us trying to approach this article and use this article more thematic and focused way. And so is the process too. And you are part of it, and your feedback is quite really welcome. We are approaching to the end of the webinar soon, and this will be probably the last opportunity for you. If you have any comments, questions to raise, please do so now. Raise your hand. If not, Sarah is not here anymore, right? Okay. Sophia, you want to add anything or, final comment?
I don't have a lot in terms of final comments, but I think, a key takeaway, at least for me, in kind of approaching the final chapter is to kind of help you use this information to make it as simple as possible, so that in view of financial resource constraints, people can still kind of consider how they can approach the right in their respective countries, which is always useful. So thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Lazari, you want to add anything?
Yeah, so again, also from my side, thank you very much for participating in this. I think it is important to ask those that work on issues on the ground how they experience things, to make sure that whatever document we produce, it is relevant and it is useful for you. So thank you very much. And I also wanted to say that this process is not finished after this webinar. So I will be sending you a follow-up email. You can, even after this webinar.
Is it only me? I cannot hear you, Lazari.
Oh, can others hear me?
I can hear you.
Maybe.
Yes, we can hear you, Lazari.
Okay. Where was I? Yeah, so you will be getting.
So I can hear everyone else, but I can't hear Lazari. I don't know.
I don't know why that is, but I'm basically, let me write in the chat. So You will be getting a follow-up email from me, and if you have read the draft and also would like to make some written remarks, you're welcome to do so and to send them to us. If you want to participate in a treaty body review, or you're interested in the special procedures but you don't know how to start, also feel free to let us know. If there's anything we can help you with, we're happy to do so. So I think that's it. We took note of your remarks, and we'll make sure to include them for the next version of it, which you will also receive. So you'll have your say in the coming weeks until we publish this draft. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as Lazare said, this is ongoing process, not the end of it. So feel free to approach us anytime. And so with this, I'd like to close this webinar. And thank you everyone once again for taking your time and joining us. We will keep in touch. All right. So with this, I would like to close this webinar. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.